Behind every story is a world of twists and turns, secrets waiting to be uncovered, and mysteries begging to be solved. I'm Mr. Wilder. Let's dive into today's story and uncover what lies in the shadows. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. His father, John Stanley, was a World War I veteran who worked as a machinist, while his mother, Marion, was a homemaker. Gacy's childhood was marked by a strained relationship with his father, who was physically and emotionally abusive to his family. He was also known to have a volatile temper and would often lash out at his family members. Gacy's mother, Marion, was a dominant figure in his life. She was a strong-willed woman who often stood up to her husband's abuse, and she was fiercely protective of her children. Gacy was extremely close to his mother, and he often sought comfort and solace in her presence. Gacy's early life was also marked by a number of health problems. He suffered from a heart condition, and he was often hospitalized for various ailments. Despite these health issues, Gacy was a relatively happy child, and he enjoyed playing with his siblings and exploring the neighborhood. As Gacy entered adolescence, he began to develop a fascination with clowning. He started performing as a clown at local parties and events, and he eventually became known as Pogo the Clown. Gacy's clown persona was a way for him to escape the stresses and anxieties of his everyday life, and it provided him with a sense of freedom and creativity. Despite his growing interest in clowning, Gacy's relationship with his father continued to deteriorate. John Stanley Gacy's abuse and belittling took a toll on Gacy's self-esteem, and he began to struggle in school. He was eventually diagnosed with a learning disability, and he was forced to repeat several grades. As Gacy entered his late teens, he began to rebel against his father's authority. He started to assert his independence, and he began to explore his own interests and passions. Despite these efforts, Gacy's relationship with his father remained strained, and it would continue to affect him for the rest of his life. As John Wayne Gacy entered adulthood, he began to struggle with the demons that would eventually drive him to commit some of the most heinous crimes in American history. Despite his outward appearance as a cheerful and friendly clown, Gacy was secretly tormented by a number of inner conflicts. One of the key factors that contributed to Gacy's descent into madness was his troubled relationship with his father. John Stanley Gacy was a strict disciplinarian who often belittled and humiliated his son. He was also physically abusive, and Gacy would often bear the brunt of his father's rage. Gacy's father was also a heavy drinker, and his alcoholism would often lead to violent outbursts. Gacy would often try to intervene, but his efforts would only lead to more abuse and humiliation. As a result of his father's abuse, Gacy began to struggle with feelings of inadequacy and low self-worth. He became withdrawn and isolated, and he began to struggle in school. As Pogo, Gacy was able to escape the stresses and anxieties of his everyday life. He was able to adopt a more carefree and playful persona, and he was able to tap into his more creative and artistic side. However, as Gacy's fascination with clowning continued to grow, it also began to take on a more sinister tone. He began to explore the darker side of his own psyche, and he began to develop a fascination with death and violence. Gacy's fascination with death and violence was fueled by his own feelings of mortality and vulnerability. As a child, he had been diagnosed with a heart condition, and he had been forced to undergo a number of surgeries. He began to explore the world of true crime, and he became fascinated with the stories of famous serial killers. As Gacy delved deeper into the world of true crime, he began to develop a sense of identification with the serial killers he was reading about. He began to see himself in their stories, and he began to feel a sense of kinship with them. As a result of these experiences, Gacy began to develop a deep-seated sense of loneliness and disconnection. He began to feel like an outsider, and he began to explore the darker side of his own self. January 2, 1972, Timothy McCoy, a 16-year-old high school student, arrived at John Wayne Gacy's construction site, eager to start his new job. Gacy, a seemingly friendly and charismatic employer, greeted McCoy with a warm smile. As they worked together, Gacy began to chat with McCoy, asking him about his interests and hobbies. McCoy, unaware of the sinister intentions lurking beneath Gacy's friendly demeanor, opened up to him, sharing his dreams and aspirations. As the day wore on, Gacy's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began to make suggestive comments and advances towards McCoy, who, feeling uncomfortable and trapped, tried to brush him off. But Gacy's persistence turned to rage, and he suddenly lunged at McCoy, grabbing him by the throat. McCoy struggled to break free, but Gacy's grip was too strong. With a twisted grin, Gacy tightened his hold, slowly squeezing the life out of McCoy. As McCoy's body went limp, Gacy's face contorted with a mixture of excitement and satisfaction. He had crossed a threshold, committing a heinous act that would haunt him for the rest of his life. With a sense of calm, Gacy began to dispose of McCoy's body, dragging it to the crawl space beneath his home. The darkness and confinement of the crawl space seemed to swallow McCoy's lifeless form whole, as if erasing all evidence of the horrific crime that had just been committed. In the immediate aftermath of Timothy McCoy's murder, Gacy worked to cover his tracks. He cleaned and disinfected the area where the murder took place, and he disposed of any evidence that might link him to the crime. Gacy also began to spin a web of lies, telling his family and friends that McCoy had simply quit his job and moved away. As the days turned into weeks, Gacy's mental state began to deteriorate. He became increasingly paranoid and anxious, convinced that the police were closing in on him. Gacy's relationships with his family and friends began to fray, and he became isolated and withdrawn. Meanwhile, Timothy McCoy's body lay hidden in the crawl space beneath Gacy's home. The smell of decomposition began to waft up into the house, and Gacy's family members started to notice a strange odor. Gacy told them that the smell was coming from a dead animal, but only he knew the truth. As the months went by, John Wayne Gacy's killing spree showed no signs of slowing down. He had already claimed the lives of numerous young men and boys, and he seemed to be becoming more and more brazen with each new murder. The killing of Timothy McCoy was followed by the murder of John Prestige, a 19-year-old man who had been hired by Gacy to work on a construction project. Next, Gacy claimed the life of Jeffrey Rignall, a 26-year-old man who had been picked up by Gacy at a bus stop. The killing continued, with Gacy claiming the lives of numerous other young men and boys. But it was the disappearance of Rob Peast, a 15-year-old boy who had been hired by Gacy to work on a construction project, that would ultimately lead to Gacy's downfall. Rob Peast was a 15-year-old boy with a bright smile and a love for life. He was a sophomore at Maine West High School, and he had just started working part-time at a pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois. On December 11, 1978, Rob's mother, Elizabeth Peast, dropped him off at the pharmacy for his shift. Rob was excited to earn some extra money for Christmas, and he was looking forward to seeing his friends after work, but Rob never made it home that night. His mother reported him missing when he failed to return home by his curfew, and the police began to investigate. As the investigation unfolded, the police discovered that Rob had last been seen leaving the pharmacy with John Wayne Gacy, a local contractor who had been hired to do some work at the pharmacy. Gacy told the police that he had offered Rob a ride home, but that Rob had gotten out of the car at a stoplight and disappeared into the night. However, the police didn't believe Gacy's story. They had found a piece of fabric near the pharmacy that matched the fabric of Rob's jacket. After the police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's home on December 13, 1978, they began to search the premises. They started by searching the main floors of the house, but they soon realized that the smell was coming from the crawl space. As the police made their way into the crawl space, they were met with a sight that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The crawl space was filled with the remains of numerous young men and boys, all of whom had been murdered by Gacy. The police found 29 bodies in the crawl space, all of whom had been buried in shallow graves. The police cars pulled up to John Wayne Gacy's home, their lights flashing in the darkness. The officers stepped out, their guns drawn, and approached the front door. Gacy answered, a look of surprise on his face, and the officers quickly took him into custody. As the police searched Gacy's home, they found a treasure trove of evidence. There were photographs of young men, some of whom were naked or posed in suggestive positions. There were also pieces of jewelry, clothing, and other personal items that belonged to the victims. The police took Gacy to the Des Plaines Police Department, where they began to question him. Gacy was calm and cooperative at first, but as the questioning continued, he became increasingly agitated. The courtroom was packed as John Wayne Gacy's trial began. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence against him, including the testimony of numerous witnesses and the physical evidence found at his home. Gacy's defense team argued that he was insane at the time of the murders, but the prosecution countered that he was fully aware of his actions and had carefully planned and executed each murder. As the trial continued, the jury heard from many of the victims' families, who spoke about the impact of Gacy's crimes on their lives. The jury also saw graphic photographs of the victims' bodies, which were found in the crawl space beneath Gacy's home. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver John Wayne Gacy's sentence. Gacy's lawyers had argued that he was mentally ill and should not be held fully responsible for his actions, but the prosecution had countered that he was a calculating and ruthless killer. The judge looked at Gacy, his eyes stern and unyielding. "John Wayne Gacy," he said, "you have been found guilty of 33 counts of murder. You have shown no remorse for your actions, and you have caused immeasurable pain and suffering to the families of your victims." The judge paused, his voice heavy with emotion. "I hereby sentence you to death," he said. The news of John Wayne Gacy's sentence spread like wildfire through the community. Many people were relieved that justice had been served, but others were left wondering how Gacy had been able to hide his true nature for so long. As the days turned into weeks, the community began to heal. The victims' families began to find closure, and the police began to piece together the full extent of Gacy's crimes. The John Wayne Gacy case serves as a reminder of the importance of being vigilant and aware of our surroundings, and of the need to support and care for those who have been affected by trauma and violence. It also serves as a testament to the enduring power of human evil and the need for us to always be mindful of the darkness that can lurk within. That's all for this video. If you like this kind of content, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the bell icon so you won't miss any of my uploads. I'm Mr. Wilder, and I'll see you on the next video.